Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. The EU says Ireland must collect $14.6 billion in unpaid tax from the US tech giant Apple. That works out at more than $3,000 for every member of the population, or enough to finance the country's health system for a whole year. But the Irish government doesn't want the money and is appealing against the ruling. What's the problem? Well, for decades, Ireland has been using favourable tax policies to attract foreign companies, and it's reaped the rewards with some of the world's biggest companies setting up shop there, including Facebook, Google's parent company Alphabet, and of course, Apple. The government is worried it will lose this status if the EU's ruling is enforced. US politicians are also upset, accusing the EU of going after tax revenue, which Apple would otherwise pay to the US Treasury. Our newsmaker today is the global tax system, as we ask how international companies can be taxed fairly in a globalized world.
Apple's story fits the American dream. An entrepreneur working out of his garage builds one of the world's biggest companies. But part and parcel of stories about wealth and power is conflict. Apple has been accused of violating workers' rights and antitrust laws, and now tax avoidance. The company has been slapped with an EU order to pay billions in back taxes, something the company's CEO, Tim Cook, has described as total political nonsense.
Actually, the enforcement part of the competition portfolio does not really fit into any political picture.
The allegations Apple faces are nothing new. A U.S. congressional probe 3 years ago found that Apple avoids billions in taxes through a complex web of subsidiaries, several of them based in Ireland.
We pay all the taxes we owe, every single dollar. We don't depend on tax gimmicks.
Gimmick or not, Apple has taken advantage of Ireland's liberal tax laws. Its arrangement has allowed it to shift 2/3 of its global profits to its Irish-registered subsidiaries. Under the agreement, Apple managed to pay an effective tax rate of just 1% on its profits from selling iPhones and iPads outside the US in 2003. By 2014, the rate was just 0.005%, or $5,000 in tax on every $1 million in profit. The EU ruling for Apple to pay $14.6 billion in back taxes is a fraction of the $230 billion the company holds in cash. A study last year found that Apple has more than $180 billion of its profits overseas, much of which is believed to have been funneled through Ireland. Apple is hardly the only US multinational to use tax avoidance strategies. The legal issue is that the EU found Ireland's tax agreement with Apple to constitute anti-competitive state aid. But many critics of the arrangement say the larger issue is a lack of transparency. A report by Oxfam found that US corporate giants have put $1.4 trillion into tax havens, despite receiving trillions of dollars in taxpayer support.
That money in tax havens represents $100 billion that is not available to the American public as tax revenue. This system is rigged. It's rigged against rich countries. It's rigged against poor countries. The average citizen is paying for the fact that large corporations aren't paying taxes.
Amazon and McDonald's are also the subjects of EU investigations into allegations of sweetheart tax deals with European governments. Apple executives and Irish officials say they plan to challenge the EU's order. Meanwhile, the US government has been deadlocked over how to induce American companies to repatriate their earnings. But with an EU crackdown in effect, pressure is mounting on Washington to take action before governments overseas take a big bite out of their apple. Randolph Nogle, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me here in the studio is TRT World's editor-at-large, Craig Copetas, and from Dublin, I'm joined by Brian Lucey, a professor of finance from Trinity College. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Let me start with you, Mr. Lucey. So your government doesn't want the money, it's appealing. I guess there's a fear that all of that capital is going to say bye-bye. Are they right to do so?
Are they right to appeal? They probably have no choice politically and legally but to appeal, given that they have, over at least the last half decade, been arguing they did nothing wrong. As to whether or not they're right that the capital will fly away and never be seen again, I think, and most independent analysts have concluded that that is an overblown concern. I mean, as late as yesterday, Fitch Global came out and said, given the Irish economy is still recovering from the global financial crash, getting 19 billion euro, because that's what it amounts to with interest and penalties, so it's north of $20 billion, getting that would be helpful. And it would not, in their view, have any deleterious effects on future capital investment. The Irish government have been very good over decades, over 60 years nearly, at getting foreign direct investment. And that's because of a complex set of activities, of which tax is undoubtedly one, but is neither necessarily the sole nor the largest determinant of a location decision by a multinational corporation.
Do you agree with Brussels that these low taxes constituted illegal state aid? Illegal state aid?
Well, if it was state aid, then it's illegal under European Union laws and regulations. The issue isn't so much the low taxes, it's that Apple was due to pay whatever corporation tax was, but they allege a separate deal was made, which had the effect of reducing the taxes to those scandalously low levels that we saw. And if that is the case, and they have alleged that it is the case, they feel confident it is the case, then yes, it is illegal state aid.
Okay.
There's no question about that.
Craig Copetas, the corporation tax is 12.5% in Ireland. Apple found a way, I wish I had their lawyers, during some of the years to cut its effective rate to 1%, that was 2003, and 0.005% in 2014. Man, those lawyers are good.
No.
Brussels has a case, doesn't it?
No, the Irish state is a sovereign state made up of officials elected by the people. And if the Irish government wants to create a tax rate such as that, they have every right to do so. And Brussels has no right, and this will be proven when it gets to court, to interfere here. This decision is dubious on so many grounds that you have enough for Starbucks to make coffee for the next 300 years. You're talking about what you were asking your guest about. You were saying that this is a subsidy, state aid. How can a tax rate be a state subsidy? I don't understand that kind of logic, and very few people in the business community or the legal community understand it.
So let me ask the man in Ireland, is your sovereignty being infringed upon by Brussels? Because you mentioned in your first answer, you said politically the government had to appeal. There was an RTE poll, Ireland's national broadcaster. 62% of respondents supported the Irish government appealing the decision. So clearly many Irish people feel that, hey, Brussels, stay out of our financial business, right?
First of all, Brussels, the setting of national corporate tax rates and individual tax rates is a sovereign issue. The application of them, however, is not. And your guest needs to look back at hundreds of examples across all tax heads, including corporation tax, excise taxes, taxes on manufactured goods, where because of the allegation, and sometimes proven, sometimes not, that this was a barrier to competition, a form of state aid to a sector or individual companies, it was interfering with the market. So it's not the rate, it's the application. It's like you or I taking, it's alleged, an incorrect deduction on our personal taxes, or bending the rules to the point where they break.
Okay, let's get Craig in.
The reason a lot of people in Ireland are probably
Okay, Brian,
concerned,
finish the sentence and then Craig will come in.
Yes, the reason that a lot of people are concerned is because there has been a very, very strong, quite strident argument from the government that, as we said at the top of the program, if we take this money, or we may take this money, then all of the foreign direct investment that's been here for 60 years will fly out the door. Nobody believes that.
Craig?
Ireland's tax strategy has been highly successful and good for the people of Ireland. The courts will show that the EU has no right sticking their nose into this. We can even point to this. What the EU is trying to do here is something called retrospection. They're trying to impose taxes that go back decades. In another era that was called plundering. And the EU is doing this is because they want a piece of a pie that Ireland says we already have enough of. Now, this is going to take years to adjudicate in the courts, but the root problem here is that the European economy on the continent is so bad that investment wants to go to countries such as Ireland or the UK, and not France, and certainly not Denmark, where the competition commissioner Vestager is from. It doesn't work that way. Companies make decisions on two things and two things alone: interest rates, tax rates. Well, Europe is now in negative rates. You're not going to go to France and set up Apple, where you're going to be hit left, right, and center. You're going to go to Ireland.
So, Brian, you're shaking your head in disagreement.
Well, yes, I think the first thing is that most of the fines and taxes relate to stuff from the mid-noughties onwards. So that's one issue. Second issue, though, is retrospection is where the government say, well, you know, you paid 10% tax or 12% tax. We've decided you should have been paying 25% tax. And no government is ever going to deal with that. That's a third rail kind of thing. This, however, is a case where they say, look, at the time you should have been paying 12% tax, or 10% as it would have been in some cases. You weren't, because of the fact that you were evading this tax. Now, whether that's going to be proven or not is something that, you know, the three of us don't know. That's the allegation on the floor at the moment. But it's not retrospection for the government of any government to say, well, if you should have been paying X and you weren't, then you should have been paying X, and there's taxes and fines. The third issue is Ireland gets a lot of play because we're really good at putting ourselves out and about. But we're actually minnows in the international FDI industry, and the vast majority of FDI, extra-European FDI, goes not to Ireland, it goes to countries like France and Germany and these horrible places that have all these negative interest rates because of money sloshing around. The biggest problem in the world tax industry is a twofold issue, I think we'd probably all agree. One is that the rules are so horribly complicated that lawyers can drive coaches and horses through anything that any legislature anywhere in the world can devise. And secondly, there's a real lack of willingness on all sides to harmonize and clamp down on the issues. All this money is trapped outside the US, because even if everything is Simon pure, even if companies have paid everything they should have paid and more, they will be levied with a 35% rate, even if they have paid tax on that beforehand and they are in a dual tax treaty with the US, they'll still be taxed. Again, repatriating it to the US. The sclerosis of the US Congress
fair
is
enough,
at least
Brad.
part
Point well made. I want to bring Craig in. Craig, can we all agree that perhaps these sorts of cases highlight the fact that the corporate tax system globally, in a globalized world with these multinational companies, whether they are tech giants or not, needs some sort of rethink now, because these issues are coming up that didn't come up before?
This is why the leaders at the ASEAN summit in Southeast Asia right now are trying to put globalization back on the agenda. What's happening here with Apple is a prime illustration of why people don't like globalization, and also why, why people like globalization. Ireland is a sovereign nation. They can set whatever tax rate they want. And where does the EU come off in telling them what tax rate to set? In fact, well, no, yes, you are. And the lunacy of this is that there is only a 4-year statute of limitations for tax arrears in Ireland. So this thing is never going to wash.
Okay. Craig's made his point. Brian, come in.
You're factually incorrect in the issue of the EU telling us about our tax rate. They're telling us about the application of the rate. The application of the laws is not the law. That's the first thing. The second issue is there is more than a 4-year statute of limitations, because on every piece of capital gains tax, on every other piece of tax you get, the revenue explicitly say, we can go back at any stage to any personal tax level. I know this because I've seen these letters. So, you know, being a sovereign independent state, as you said, our tax laws are, if properly and fairly applied, reasonably transparent.
Okay, so Brian, they don't set the rate, but they have set the figure. They've chosen the number for Apple to pay. Are you comfortable with that?
That's what they've said. Well, I'm comfortable with the process of a supranational authority, which is what we have. Now, we may not like that, but we have that authority. And they have done it in every other area. They've said, if you weren't paying what you should have been paying, this is what you should have been paying, therefore pay it.
Who's
Look,
telling you that? This is the point. Ireland is clearly being dictated to by 28 gormless and feckless competition commissioners who no one knows, who are unelected, by the way, in Brussels, who are being led, by the way, by the president of the commission, who is the former prime minister and finance minister of Luxembourg. Okay. Now, if you look up tax evasion in the dictionary, you will see a picture of Luxembourg.
Okay, but that's guilt by association, Craig. Okay, Brian, final response, Brian.
We're not here to debate the governance of the European Union. That's a bigger issue. We're here to debate whether or not, within the rules that we have at the moment, two things are the case. A, that the European Union has the legal authority under competition, which it has done for the last 42 years, to intervene if the application of government taxes is, in its opinion, incorrect. It's not about setting the rate, it's about setting the rules. That it's doing. Second issue is whether or not, if in doing so, FDI would fly out of Ireland. And it absolutely, there's no evidence whatsoever that it would do so. And I'll give you the prime example on that. This loophole or evasion or issue or whatever it was closed off in the Taxes Act 2014.
Okay.
In 2015, Apple announced an 800 million euro expansion and a 1,000 job expansion of their plant. So while Apple may not like this, it clearly hasn't stopped them investing billion.
Sure, but I guess it might also be a separate issue that Apple's not really been hurt financially because it's just that big. It's a leviathan. I guess it's fair to say opinions differ on this issue. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Brian Lucey and Craig Copetas. We're out of time. Thank you very much.